welcome on behalf of the Board of Directors of Muskoka Chautauqua. And this has been an incredible day, starting off with the youth forum, and the conversations and the ideas were just phenomenal and so inspiring. And I think we'll probably be sharing some of this a little later with you all. But I'd like to thank each individual here for bringing your expertise and your talents and your piece of the puzzle to create a bigger picture.
And now I'd like to introduce you to Michael Jones. He's a musician, a composer, a facilitator, a leadership expert, and we're really lucky to have him helping us move through today. So let's all enjoy, and I'm so excited.
Hey, thanks, Emma. Thank you and welcome. It's wonderful to work with the group this morning and to have that energy kind of more or less pour into the afternoon. I think the conversation sort of started before all of us arrived here, and that really is the theme of today, is really leading through conversation. I think that's sort of a new work of leadership, I think, is how we can engage and bring others together in conversations. I was talking to a colleague recently who has been, I think, head of the PC Council on innovation, and I was asking, what have you learned? What stood out for you for all that work you did over those years? And he said, well, I think the realization is we just don't innovate. We have to learn to innovate together. He said we have to find ways that we can join our creative thinking together, so that's how we have to work. And really innovating together is to have conversations together. Conversations come from the root converse, which means to turn together. So implied in the conversation is we might find we need to suspend or give up some of the things we thought we knew or believed in order to be open to new ideas and to new possibilities. And to start that, I'd like to pose the question of a story of a time when you felt most alive here in the region. A place or an experience where you felt most alive and most connected and sort of felt like, this is where I belong, this is what I came for, this is why I'm here.
People come to Algonquin Park, for instance, that camp there as kids, and yet they're in their 70s, and they reunite every year to come back to that place. So it's a sense of place that gives us, as artists, for instance, the great inspiration that we work from.
I came all the way up from Toronto, and I can tell you that, yes, coming back here on a regular basis is really important for everybody. Our group as well talked about the importance of the connection with the lakes and with water and with the spirit of the lakes and the water. I think I'm correct in that, what I'm saying. But we also touched on the fact that after Labor Day, maybe there's not a lot going on.
There's a lot going on in here, and there's clearly a lot of people very interested in having things going on. And I think that it's important that we, continue to do that and to look at new ways that we can, do things together and incorporate that.
New ways of connecting together,
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, our group has spent time away from Muskoka, so some of our conversation was how much we actually appreciate the beauty of where we are compared to other parts of the world. We talked about that. We also talked about the people and the communities and how multi-generational Muskoka is and how wonderful it is to get family together.
So when you were playing, I just started writing, and I wrote, when I let the painting paint itself and the poem write itself, and then sometimes there's a magical moment when they become one and tell the truth. And then others come and we tell our stories together. And then there is that magical moment when they become one. And I'm not sure what Jack even asked me. But the next thing I know, we were talking about a building.
Maybe I got there too quickly. My job is making reality out of dreams. My magical moments are at the moment of conception and also in the moment of realization. So what we began to talk about is that it's been a 20-year dream for Gail. How do we make this real? I love all the warmth and energy in the room. How do we take that and funnel it into something concrete? In 2017, you're going to host the Chautauqua International Meeting. Why don't you have everything ready for by then? If we work back from that date, let me give you a little schedule. 2 years to build, a year to produce the construction documents to refine the design, 18 months to fundraise, few days to conceive it, a little longer perhaps. But then there's the whole dynamic of conceiving the project, getting it something that's tangible, with enough excitement in it to raise the money to do it.
What you guys are all talking about this relationship to nature, about finding this kind of almost spiritual experience here, is something that is really valuable in the world today. Because in developing countries, this may not be the kind of motivation for developing their places. About creating a connection to nature, about creating a place where there's a sense of healing, a sense of connection to the earth. And I think this is a very valuable piece to bring in not only to a national conversation about what Canada is and what it means to be Canadian, but maybe even talking about, like, you know, what it means to be, what Canada offers the world.
We have a wonderful seating for what I see as sort of the opening to the arc of questions we wanted to work with this afternoon. And it is to look into the future, seeing where we come from, what our heritage is, what our roots are, and what we envision in the future. And I think Jack has really got us started as sunshine with what that might look like. And we'll have the question, you got it over there as well. So we've got it on both charts. And I think what we could add here at the top is thinking globally, because I think the idea really is to think large here. Imagine a future in which the region of Explorer's Edge, or this general region, is recognized globally for the unique qualities of its community, its culture, and gives character to the region. What would it look like, and what would it feel like? What would it look like, and what would it feel like? Just thinking globally and beginning to imagine it in the terms of the built environment too. I think we're very tuned to nature, but how do we draw nature into the quality of the built environment here? These questions are naturally somewhat ambiguous, and it's deliberate, so we don't have some expert take over and say, I have the answer to it, and kind of move us along. So I think it begins to call all of us to kind of bring our voices in as we begin to put the puzzle together, so to speak, in that way. So I suggest, again, we stand up, we find, all of you know each other pretty much, so there are not too many strangers in the room, but just find some more fresh thinking by sitting with some other folks here in the room, okay?
I'm going to bring the more legible one. Another.
So we'll take a few minutes before we move to the next question to harvest, in a sense, what we heard from this last one. Anybody like to get us started? And I'll just get the mic around the room.
Okay, our group, we talked about nature and then community and culture, the two sections in the question. So as far as nature is concerned, we all talked first, after the first question, about living in such a beautiful natural setting of Muskoka. So we feel whatever is created needs to use the beautiful local materials, stone, lots of granite around here, and wood, of course, living in the forest. So that's regarding the content of the structure. The context is it should be enjoyed by the people using it. So from the inside, we would like to be able to appreciate the outside, because that is the part of Muskoka that we all love. So of course, lots of vistas, but those vistas have to come without causing an issue for those looking at the structure. In culture, we thought it should represent the history of Muskoka, not just the native history, that it might be more like a village, a pod concept where you have separate buildings, not just one big, huge building, but maybe a main building, but lots of satellite buildings that you can get to either with covering or maybe even just walking outside, because that's what we all love about Muskoka, is to actually get outside. So to go from one building to the next and be outside. That the building would also be more like the 1900s in Muskoka, with cedar shake and wood siding and stone foundation, something a little bit more traditional and not too modern. Thanks.
In our group, we discussed the idea that our objectives and goals should be clear, and the community and the culture that we wish to put forth should come first, and that the buildings, the mortar and brick, should flow from those objectives, and that it would be just fine to start small, and that it should encompass the whole of Muskoka, not just one region, so that we're supporting Muskoka in general.
One thing that came up quite a bit in our group was having it accessible, so to the local population as well as to the seasonal population. So that could be a lot of things. It could be, just having it inclusive, It could also be a financial thing because we all know that the local population, the statistics show that income levels are a lot lower than the seasonal population. And also the transportation is a big issue because Muskoka is such a big geographical area. So we were talking a little bit about where even it could be located that would make everyone happy.
We were a little different at this table. We didn't get as far as what the building should look like. We dealt with things that came before that. I think we might be a little bit more pragmatic. One of the first questions that Gord raised, what would be the effect of a cultural/arts center on the theaters and other cultural buildings in surrounding towns? Would this building complement or detract from them? How far does the consumer dollar go?
The other thing that we talked about was the expertise that is here in the community that already exists that we can draw upon, and the large population base. I know there's been reference to the Banff Center as a for instance, and yet we have a huge area from which to call support, to call participation. And so that need needs to be fulfilled by having lots of things for people to do. And to go back to Beverly's point, it can complement by having all the centers that we have here in Huntsville, in Bracebridge, and Gravenhurst, and Parry Sound. And should something else develop, that we have the ability to complement and to grow and not necessarily to see them as competing forces.
All right, just another perspective. We're at the beginning of a conversation, I think, rather than at the end point. So my comment would be, Chautauqua Muskoka does not at this point in time have clarity of definition of what it wants to be in Muskoka when it matures in 15 to 25 years, and why this dream is important to all who love Muskoka. Not many people in the population of Muskoka, either permanent or seasonal or tourists, understand the word Chautauqua and what it means and what its history is and what its dreams and future could be. If you walked around the world and asked where Muskoka is, you get a few people that might nibble. Ask them what Chautauqua is, and I don't think you get as many.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to define what is Chautauqua when it grows up and why it's important, and then we might be able to move forward to implement things over time.
Point taken, and Chautauqua is a brand new brand for the arts organization that's been in the community for a long time. So it's an opportunity to reinvent this concept and to create those visions and objectives. So I think we're at a perfect time right now to have this discussion with this room full of people who have the wherewithal and the resources to make this happen, whatever we want it to be. Then at our table, we spent the first 10 minutes just getting to know each other a little and to see the wealth of resources that we have just at one table. Never mind, I'm sure every table in the room is similar. We have people with experience in making these things happen. We have people with the resources to make these things happen. We have a community here who's obviously very committed to making this happen. So that was one of the big learnings from our table. I think one of the other things that we touched on was that in our area, in our community, everybody's so spread apart that you really need to have a lot of small centers, and that's never going to change because people can't travel too far or won't travel too far. So really what it needs to become is a network, and I think that's, sort of a model of the larger Chautauqua organization, is that it's a network.
One of the things that came up in our conversation was that there are so many passionate, intelligent, and artistic people behind this idea that anything that is manifested will no doubt be breathtaking and magical simply because of the energy that's motivating it.
Kind of came around to the same conclusion that because of the vast area of Muskoka, that there probably would be a need for multiple smaller centers that would be maybe under the same umbrella working maybe, you know, to advertise as one kind of unit under the same logo, but different centers so that you still have access in your area to your theater and your art classes and those kind of things, as well as the educational experience, as well as the visitors' experience. So it might not necessarily be one place. Although I love the idea of one place, but it's just getting to that place and back and forth. And we want to, you know, encompass and embrace all of the region and not just put it in one.
I think one of the common things I've been hearing earlier today and at other events is that people understand it as kind of an energy or a passion, and that's what Ellie was talking about a few minutes ago about the group I was in with her, is that that's something that everybody has in common. That's what the experience is that brings us together. But I'm a little bit with Gord back there in saying that that we need language for that in order to be able to talk about it, in order to take those next steps to attract people who already have the passion, the energy, the spirit, or whatever we want to call that piece of something that gives life to us. How do we bring that forward and talk about it in a way that people actually have an idea of what it is we're talking about? So some clear definitions about what we're about seems to me to be one of the important first steps, and visualized in the body of a building. It could be partly that too, but I think to do any fundraising that we're going to need to do, we're going to have to be clear about new language, different ways of talking about these things that give life to us.
Talk around the table here was about the educational component, and that basically the school year equals the off season in Muskoka, and a Center for the Arts could certainly address that in a really big way and provide professional opportunities for artists already working here.
Sure.
Yeah.
One of the things that we discussed also was the matter of the Banff School, and part of the reason that Banff has worked the way it has is because it was a very isolated community that was a long way up in the mountains, and it took 50 years to develop. I don't know that this room actually wants to spend 50 years developing, and it's not an isolated community up in the mountains that was basically a railroad town that needed to have more going on, despite the fact that the hotel itself was a full-time operation, as is this particular structure. And in Banff, they had the theater of the CP dumping people on their doorstep every single day. This community does not. So I think that what we have to do within this community is recognize that there's many different silos within the community, and we have to break down the various silos. And this was one of the things, this was part of what we were talking about at our table, is breaking down the silos and bringing people together, as you've been saying, about having a network. But to compare this, to compare this Chautauqua, which is a network, to Banff, which was an isolated community where it got started in the 1950s when the Canadian population was 15 million, is a bit of a different sort of situation.
The building is actually important. I think it's important because it's emblematic of what Muskoka Chautauqua is. And if you create a structure and an environment and a center, a gathering place that has so much presence, and as Kevin said to me a few minutes ago, a place where the experience is really transformative, but also a place that is transformative. Now you're talking great, right? This great, that thanks for inspiring us to greatness, but that great thing is not going to happen without a place. It's got to be a place, maybe connected to a lot of other places, but there's got to be a place. And it's got to be absolutely, unbelievably imagination capturing.
Those places that capture the imagination often are places that tell stories. And it's the story of place that I think is carried forward. So it becomes the embodiment of the community story. And that may be a way that we think about place in the context of what is the Muskoka's, or the regional story. And what are the other diverse stories that are in smaller communities within the larger community of the region. And so we begin to think of how our built environment is a reflection of those stories. Lakehead University, for example, and I worked with the dean at Lakehead as they were building the campus in Aurelia, really said the story of learning for him has always been in the commons, not in the classroom. And so Lakehead has this beautiful commons next to the library. When you walk in, you don't walk into a classroom, you walk into a commons. When I talked to students who are there, they said, I spend almost all my time in the commons. That's my education is happening in that space, which is very much like what we have here. This is like a learning commons, I think, for the region, by coming from so many different diverse backgrounds and perspectives and angles on it, that we begin to create that commons. And so we could think of how a physical building could be a reflection of the sense of the community itself.
The three guys in the corner here were having another discussion just a moment ago, and Gord brought to our attention the piece that's on the table here, and we were talking about earlier about the need for clarity as to what Chautauqua is and where it is going, because in the brown at the top there, it talks about a creative multidisciplinary arts-based programming for entertainment and lifelong learning, which is a lot of what we have been talking about here. But then it goes on to say that Muskoka Chautauqua is an arts-based community endeavoring to reestablish Muskoka as Canada's literary summer capital. And now you've gone on to limit yourself. And so I think it's really important because that we know exactly where Chautauqua is going and what its sort of whole game plan is, because what you might need for one particular facet of arts is obviously probably quite a bit less if you're looking at something that is a literary summer capital. So I think that there needs to be some real clarity as to where it's going, because it was Jack, I believe, the architect, who mentioned the importance of when you're going to talk to donors and you're going to talk to people who are going to support a project, they want to know that you've got a plan and that you're going to look after their money and how that money is going to be spent. And I think that all needs its clarity.
The literary summer capital thing refers to what we were known as in the late 1800s. At one time, this was the literary summer capital of Canada. And I think that speaks to promise and hope that this could be a center for the arts, whatever that ends up being. And I think that, Dawn, you're totally right in saying clarity is important. So I think it's important to have that conversation about what it is together. Instead of just coming from the inside out, like we talked about this morning and today, it's got to be from the outside in for this to be effective. And conversations like this open that door for allowing it to be from the outside in rather from the inside out.
So I wanted, as the next question, to pose the idea of what threads are we beginning to hear, both personally and collectively, that are suggesting some directions in terms of the future. What is the thread that you're sensing as you're listening into these conversations that you would want to follow or suggest to others that you'd like to draw others into? And I'm going to suggest, again, maybe smaller groups this time because we have a little less time, so we wouldn't have time to go around a full group, but maybe just find 2 other people again as we started with, and to find some other folks in the room you haven't talked with this afternoon and begin to explore this idea of what is the thread you're following, what is the thread you're taking with you as we begin to come to a close today.
The question was asked, what will Muskoka look like in a few years? How will it look and feel?
Yeah.
And I think that the Chautauqua experience will be able to reconnect with what I call rewords, a reset button. It will allow individuals using the sense of place in Muskoka to reset themselves. It will reconnect people to what it is that they place a value on. There are a number of sort of rejuvenation is another reword that pops up to my mind that this Chautauqua experience has the capacity of delivering. And I think that from a programming point of view, as we look for customers to come and visit Muskoka, the rocks, trees, and water are there, and we're grateful they are, but we need to find other reasons for people to visit. And certainly those rewords that we spoke about will contribute to that in a big way. And I think the Chautauqua experience, this is the business that they're in. And what we're able to do is to differentiate ourselves from other communities elsewhere in Canada using the practices and the policies and the approaches that have been tested and proven to be successful elsewhere. So for me, I'm really big on rewords. So reflection, renewal, All of those things are very important, and I think are threads that I'm going to take away with me from today.
And now this may not have anything to do with anything we're focused on, but it's something that I'm going to take away from myself. Jack, at a discussion, said earlier that we are our own greatest natural resource. And so I think it's been reiterated over and over that it's the community itself that makes up its greatness. That's it.
In our group, we were talking about the idea of what is Chautauqua? What does it mean? And how far does it extend? Is it limited to a certain community? Are there limitations? Does it go beyond that? And we had Rob in our group, and he's from Huntsville, and he was talking about how can Chautauqua extend to Huntsville? How can we bring that out? And I know what I see from what I've seen of the Chautauquas, there are different facets of it that Kevin was talking about, that there is the concrete or the Chautauqua that is a place, and there's also the circuit that goes around from place to place, the type of Chautauqua that takes all these other forms of entertainment, arts, philosophy, whatever it is, literacy, to the other communities. And it's like, I see it like an extension, like a network. And you can see how this whole concept, it's an idea that can spread just by the enthusiasm and the energy that is behind it and the passion that each one brings to it.
Have these little hubs already started in our communities, that I see it more as a series of threads that make up a fabric, as opposed to one single thread. I think we already have these threads existing, and it's just a matter of knitting them together into a cohesive, and whether that falls under the word of Chautauqua or the mission statement of what Chautauqua is, that's whether, to be seen.
I see technology playing a really big role in what you guys are trying to accomplish here. I'd like to see a lot more sharing. We're a culture that has adapted social media in all of our business strategies, yet a lot of us, I think, don't know how to share very well, or aren't quite sure about sharing because that might mean we lose a little funding or something. But I think it's the reverse can happen. When you share, the funding goes around, everybody does well, and I think this is a great opportunity to kind of share really well throughout the region that Chautauqua covers.
Yes, when I was mentioning about the human resources aspect, the old saying that build it and they will come is not necessarily true in the sense of a building. In our group with Ron, we were talking about that, the fact you can build a pretty fancy building and go broke the next year. And the fact is that what you should be doing is advertising the people who are in that area. You've got the human resources. People will come to take art with somebody, take music with somebody else. They will go for where people who have this great passion for whatever they're doing, not for the building. The building doesn't mean anything. The building is just a convenience. But if you were to advertise the wealth of ability that you have in this community in all the fields of art, that is a tremendous drawing card. And I think that's where you have to go.
My name's James, and I'm with Explorer's Edge, and I just want to thank everyone for coming here today. What I'm going to take back to my board of directors is that, well, one of the reasons we set up a fund and opportunity was that we can't do everything ourselves. We can't work inside a box. The collaboration is a new competition. And we really wanted to, we don't have the capacity to do tourism product development by ourselves. We cover regions of Algonquin Park, Almaguin Highlands, Parry Sound, and Muskoka, all very important to the social fabric of our success. We'll only be successful for the sum of all our parts in developing tourism. So we opened up an opportunity for organizations to come to us with ideas on how to move tourism forward, how to develop tourism. And Muskoka Chautauqua was one of 15 organizations that we supported because we knew we couldn't do it by ourselves. We needed to bring in knowledge and have a collaborative process. And it wasn't as much about the product Muskoka Chautauqua and developing the experience. It was the approach the organization took to developing the product, this open and transparent dialogue. We found as our organization being open and transparent and being inclusive. We have 7 committees where we allow anybody to sit on the committees, and we found that process is part of our success. Good governance, open and transparent, letting everybody have a voice at the table. And so it's not as much as, it's very important to move the product and forward for Muskoka Chautauqua, but it's the process that we're going, sitting in a circle, you know, talking about what it's going to take, and everybody's opinions and values, because it's only going to be successful if we're all behind it, if we're all working towards the same goal, moving it forward.
Well, in our circle, we were speaking of similar ideas, and I can see where the sharing and the communication is essential if we want to go forward as a community, as call it a network or cross-pollination for all of the arts and education.
I'm conscious of our time. It's 4 o'clock, and I know that it'd be wonderful to hear all the voices. And maybe that time will come when we can have all the voices in the circle. Yeah.
Before you do that, perhaps one of the things we could do this summer, and maybe for several years, was have a Muskoka Cultural Renaissance, the Muskoka Chautauqua Trail, showing Muskoka and all of the wonderful spots and culture and arts spots throughout Muskoka's map, and on the back, list all of the Muskoka arts and culture organizations that every tourist and every cottager and every citizen should visit to enjoy and make their life better. Let's start with the Muskoka Chautauqua Trail first, and we'll see where it goes.
I invite you to go back into the world again after this afternoon, knowing that we're not quite the same as we came in. I know when I did piano concerts, I never felt the same person left the bench who sat down on it 2 hours before. There's something that changes, I think, when we're in these kinds of spaces. And so I invite you to take hold of that thread and find some other fellow travelers, and we'll keep this process working, and we'll be in touch with you. Okay. With that, thank you. It's great to be with you.